Tonight, we're not here to fix anything, not to understand everything, not to become someone better before you're allowed to rest. This is a quiet space where we gently let go and return to inner peace through soft Zen stories inspired by the Buddha, shared slowly so your mind can soften and your body can rest. Maybe today asked a little too much from you. Too many thoughts, too many worries, too many small things you tried to hold together. And maybe, just for this moment, you're ready to set them down. Here, you don't need to improve yourself. You don't need to solve tomorrow. You are already enough simply by being here, breathing quietly. Just for a moment. Where are you listening from tonight? Wherever you are, I'm grateful you're here, sharing this quiet space. Let your breath slow, as if it remembers the way home. Let your shoulders soften, like they no longer need to carry the world. Tonight, we'll listen to a simple story. A story from ordinary life, carrying a small thread of Zen and Buddhist wisdom. Not to give you more to think about, but to help you loosen your grip. Because suffering rarely ends by force. It softens when we stop holding it so tightly. There's nothing to rush, nothing to achieve, only a gentle drifting into rest, into stillness. Whether you stay awake or slowly fall asleep, this moment is already enough. And now, we begin tonight's journey with these Zen stories. By the time the kitchen quiets down, their hands are still moving. Not fast anymore, just out of habit, guided by muscle memory that doesn't immediately understand that the rush is over. The last pan has been scrubbed, the counters wiped, the burners turned off one by one. But their body hasn't fully caught up yet. They stand at the stainless steel table under the dim backlight, looking at what's left. A plate sits in front of them, heavier than it should be, crowded with food that was never meant for one person. Portions added without thinking, extra scoops, a little more here, a little more there. Not because anyone asked, but because that's what they always do. Give more than necessary. Fill every gap. Make sure no one leaves wanting. They pick up a spoon and hesitate. All day their job is to keep things moving, to make sure everyone gets fed, satisfied, taken care of. There is comfort in that rhythm, in being useful in such a clear, measurable way. Plates come back empty. People don't complain. The system works. But at the end of the night, when the noise drains out of the room and only the low hum of the fridge remains, something else becomes visible. The overflow. They scrape the extra food gently into a container, the sound soft but distinct metal against ceramic. The plate underneath slowly reappears, its edges finally visible, clean and plain. It feels strange to stop before it's completely full again. For a long time they believed generosity meant filling every available space. If there was room, they filled it. If there was silence, they spoke. If someone seemed unsure, they stepped in. Saying no felt like waste, like selfishness. like letting something good go unused. But lately, exhaustion has been creeping in, quiet but persistent, settling into their shoulders and lower back, following them home even after the shift ends. No amount of sleep seems to fully touch it. They cap the container and set it aside, noticing how light the plate feels now. There's still food on it. Enough. Just not excessive. They sit down on a stool nearby and look at it for a moment longer than necessary, as if waiting for a feeling of guilt to arrive. It doesn't. Not exactly. Instead, there's a mild discomfort, the kind that comes when you do something unfamiliar, even if it's kinder. Their mind reaches automatically for old rules. You should give more. Someone else might need it. You can handle it. Those thoughts don't shout. They whisper. They remember learning those rules slowly over years. Praised for being accommodating, thanked for being dependable, noticed most when they went a little past their limit. No one ever said, "You must empty yourself to be worthy." But the lesson still landed. They take a bite from the plate, tasting the food properly for the first time tonight. It's warm, simple grounding. Eating slowly feels almost rebellious, like stepping out of line when no one is watching. As they chew, they realize how often they treat themselves like an afterthought. Leftovers, rushed moments, whatever time remains after everyone else is satisfied. They glance at the container again. The overflow hasn't disappeared. It's just been set aside. And something about that feels important. Maybe giving doesn't always mean pouring everything out. Maybe it means knowing when the cup is already full. They finish the bite and rest their hands in their lap, noticing how their shoulders drop a fraction, how their breathing settles without effort. The kitchen feels different now, less like a place of output and more like a place that's allowed to be quiet. They don't come to any conclusions. They don't promise to change everything tomorrow. They simply sit with the plate in front of them, learning the shape of enough, realizing for the first time how long it's been since they allowed themselves to stop before crossing the line into depletion. And in that pause, something begins to soften, not dramatically, not all at once, but enough to suggest that maybe what they've been calling generosity has been asking for a small correction. Not less care, just better balance. They don't rush to clean up. Normally, the moment they finish eating, their body would already be halfway back into motion, stacking dishes, wiping surfaces, preparing for whatever comes next. Tonight, they let the plate sit where it is unfinished, but no longer overwhelming. The kitchen feels different when there is no urgency. The low hum of the refrigerator fills the space, steady and patient, as if reminding them that things can continue without constant effort. They lean back slightly on the stool and let their feet rest flat on the floor, grounding themselves in the simple fact of being here. They think about how often they've equated self-worth with output. If they give more, they matter more. If they carry the extra load, they belong. If they never complain, they're appreciated. These beliefs weren't forced on them. They grew quietly, shaped by small moments of approval and relief, by the subtle comfort of being needed. Over time, giving stopped feeling like a choice and started feeling like an obligation. But obligation, they are beginning to notice, has a different texture than care. Care feels warm, intentional, alive. Obligation feels tight, mechanical, draining. They look at the plate again, at the clear boundary where the food ends and the ceramic begins. That boundary feels symbolic in a way they wouldn't have expected. It's not a rejection. It's a definition. Enough has edges. For so long they believed that boundaries made things smaller, that limits reduced what was possible. But sitting here now, they sense the opposite. The boundary is what allows the meal to be enjoyed, the body to relax, the moment to be fully lived. They remember times when they gave from emptiness, when generosity felt more like sacrifice than kindness. Those moments came with resentment. They didn't want to admit fatigue. They pushed through, and a quiet hope that someone would notice how much they were carrying. Tonight there is no audience, and in that absence, a different kind of honesty becomes possible. They place their hand over their stomach and notice the subtle signals their body has been sending all along. Full doesn't mean uncomfortable. Rested doesn't mean lazy. Stopping doesn't mean failing. These truths feel simple, almost obvious, and yet they have been ignored for years. They gather the plate and stand moving with an ease that wasn't there earlier. The container of extra food remains on the counter, closed, waiting. Not wasted, just not consumed right now. Giving from overflow, they realize, doesn't require depletion. It requires patience. They rinse the plate and set it on the rack, the sound of water gentle, unhurried. Each movement feels less like a task and more like a continuation of the care they've been offering all day, only now it includes themselves. Before turning off the light, they pause and look around the kitchen one last time. Nothing has changed on the surface. The room is the same. The work will begin again tomorrow. But something internal has shifted. They no longer feel the need to prove their value by how much they can hold or how much they can give away. The sense of worth they're touching now feels steadier, quieter, and far less fragile. It doesn't ask them to empty themselves. It simply asks them to notice when the cup is full, and to trust that keeping what they need is not a betrayal of generosity, but the very thing that makes it sustainable. They turn off the light and step out of the kitchen, carrying that understanding with them, not as a rule, not as a promise, but as a gentle recalibration. From now on, they don't need to give everything. They only need to give what truly comes from abundance. The library sounds different after closing. Not silent exactly, but softened, as if every noise has learned to lower its voice out of respect. The air system hums gently overhead, steady and even, and somewhere in the distance, a cartwheel clicks once, then settles. She sits at one of the long wooden tables near the back, the kind meant for quiet reading, not conversation. A small desk lamp casts a warm circle of light over the open book in front of her, leaving the rest of the room in shadow. She turns a page slowly. The paper makes a soft, dry sound, barely noticeable, but it feels grounding. All day people move through the library carrying questions, needs, and stories that don't belong to her, but somehow linger anyway. She helps them find what they're looking for, smiles politely, listens carefully. By the time the doors lock for the night, she feels full in a way that isn't nourishing. She presses her thumb gently against the edge of the page, and pauses. Not because the sentence is difficult, but because something in her chest has tightened again. It happens often quietly, without warning. Being open has always been part of who she is. People sense it quickly. They lean in, share more than they planned, trust her with pieces of themselves they haven't organized yet. She doesn't push them away. She knows how much courage that kind of sharing takes. But lately, she's begun to notice how porous she feels, as if there are no walls between her inner world and everyone else's. The lamp flickers faintly, then steadies. She exhales and lets her shoulders drop just a little. The room doesn't react. Nothing collapses when she stops holding herself so carefully. She looks up from the book and lets her eyes travel across the shelves, row after row of spines, each one holding a story that knows where it begins and where it ends. Boundaries, she thinks. Stories are allowed to have them. Somewhere along the way, she learned that kindness meant accessibility. Always available, always understanding, always willing to absorb what others couldn't carry alone. No one ever told her she had to do this. But the pattern formed anyway, reinforced by gratitude and relief, by the quiet praise that comes when you don't say no. She closes the book gently and rests her hands on the cover. The title doesn't matter. What matters is the feeling of containment, of something held safely between two firm edges. She wonders when she stopped believing she deserved the same. The idea of a sanctuary comes to her suddenly, not a physical place, but an inner one. A space untouched by expectation, where no explanations are required and no stories need to be processed or understood. A place where nothing can be taken. The thought feels both comforting and unfamiliar. She has always been good at creating safe spaces for others. Reading corners, quiet tables, gentle rules that protect silence without announcing themselves. But for herself, she has relied on endurance. She pushes her chair back slightly and stands, stretching her arms overhead in a slow, careful motion. The movement releases a subtle ache she didn't realize she was carrying. Her body responds immediately, grateful for the attention. As she lowers her arms, she imagines drawing a line not around her body, but within it. A boundary that doesn't harden her, doesn't make her distant, just defines where she ends and others begin. The idea doesn't feel selfish. It feels sane. She walks between the shelves, fingertips brushing lightly along the spines as she passes. Each book stays where it belongs. None of them spill into the next. None of them apologize for taking up space. She stops near the window and looks out at the dark street beyond the glass. The world continues on its own rhythm, indifferent to whether she is open or closed, giving or resting. For the first time all day, she feels a quiet permission settle in. Not to withdraw from life, not to become unreachable, but to protect something small and essential inside herself. A place no one else enters. Not because it's hidden, but because it's sacred. She turns away from the window and walks back toward the table. Her steps slow, unhurried, as if the library itself has adjusted to match her pace. The chair makes a soft sound as she pulls it out again, familiar and grounding. And she sits without opening the book this time. Instead, she rests her hands on the table and notices their warmth, For so long she believed that being kind meant being open in every direction, like a room with no doors, no walls, no way to close anything off. She thought strength was the ability to stay exposed without flinching, to remain available, no matter how much passed through her. But exposure, she is learning, is not the same as openness. Openness has choice. Exposure does not. The distinction feels subtle but important, like the difference between offering a seat and giving away the whole room. She leans back slightly and lets her gaze soften, no longer focused on any one thing. The quiet wraps around her, not as emptiness, but as presence. The library has always been a place where voices lower themselves naturally, where urgency dissolves into something more patient. She wonders why she hasn't allowed herself to internalize that same rule. Inside her, there has always been a space she never named, a place she rarely visited because she didn't think she was allowed to linger there. It's the part of her that doesn't explain, doesn't justify, doesn't make sense of pain for anyone else's comfort. A place that doesn't answer questions. Tonight, she lets herself imagine stepping into it. There are no shelves there, no words waiting to be arranged. Just a stillness that doesn't feel empty, but intact. Nothing is broken. Nothing needs to be fixed. She feels her breath slow without effort. Protecting this space, she realizes, doesn't mean closing her heart. It means refusing to let every feeling become public property. It means understanding that some things are meant to be held, not shared, not processed aloud, not softened for others. She has spent years translating herself into something digestible. Tonight she stops. The decision doesn't arrive as a declaration. It's quieter than that. More like a gentle internal shift, a subtle repositioning of weight. She doesn't vow to change how she shows up in the world tomorrow. She doesn't rehearse boundaries or imagine difficult conversations. She simply recognizes that there is a part of her that does not need permission to exist. That part is already whole. She stands and turns off the desk lamp, letting the room settle into deeper shadow. The darkness doesn't feel threatening. It feels protective, like a cover drawn gently over something precious. As she walks toward the exit, she notices how her body feels lighter. Not because anything has been resolved, but because something has been released. The constant vigilance, the quiet readiness to receive whatever comes next, has loosened its grip. At the door, she pauses and looks back once more at the long rows of shelves disappearing into the dim light. Each book remains exactly where it belongs, closed when it needs to be open when invited. She smiles softly at the thought. She doesn't need to be endlessly accessible to be kind. She doesn't need to be unguarded to be loving. She doesn't need to give everyone access to her deepest places in order to be real. Somewhere inside her, there is a sanctuary that remains untouched, not because she is hiding, but because she is honoring it. She locks the door and steps out into the night, carrying that understanding with her. Not as armor, not as distance, but as quiet reverence, a knowing that no matter what the world brings to her tomorrow, there is a place within that remains safe, steady, and entirely her own. A place no one enters. And for the first time in a long while, she trusts herself to keep it that way. In the greenhouse, The morning has its own kind of quiet. It isn't the quiet of a room with nothing in it. It's the quiet of living things that don't speak but are still doing their work. The air is warm and damp, and the plastic panels above hold soft beads of condensation that catch the early light like small, steady stars. He walks down the narrow aisle with a hose in one hand, careful not to drag it too hard across the floor. The water inside moves with a gentle weight, and when he turns the nozzle, a fine spray comes out with a soft hiss like a calm exhale. He waters the seedlings one tray at a time. The tiny plants don't look like much yet. Just thin stems, small leaves, the kind of green that seems almost too fragile to last. If someone who didn't know anything walked in, they might shrug and assume nothing important is happening. But he knows better. He has spent enough mornings in this place to understand how life builds itself quietly, not in sudden jumps, not in dramatic transformations, but in tiny, almost invisible shifts that only add up if you keep showing up. He moves slowly, watching the soil darken as it drinks. The smell is earthy and clean, like the inside of a garden after rain. The sound of water landing is soft but constant, a rhythm he has come to rely on more than he expected. Sometimes he thinks he likes the plants because they don't rush him. They don't ask him who he is. They don't ask what he's planning. They don't ask why he hasn't figured everything out yet. They simply grow at their own pace, and if he is patient and consistent, they respond. Outside the greenhouse, people talk about big dreams, big goals, big changes, big results. He has heard it plenty of times. In passing conversations, in loud advice, in the way the world seems to favor anything that looks impressive on the surface. The message is always the same. If you want something, you need to push harder, move faster, prove you deserve it. He used to believe that. He used to believe that if he wasn't becoming something huge, then he was wasting his time. If he couldn't point to a major achievement, then his life was too small to matter. That belief sat in him like a weight for years. Even now, it hasn't disappeared completely. It still shows up on certain mornings when he looks at the trays of seedlings and feels a strange impatience rise in his chest, like a voice saying, "This is it. This is all you've got." He knows that voice. It's the same voice that makes him compare his life to other people's highlight reels. The same voice that turns other people's success into evidence of his failure. The same voice that calls slow progress stuck. He tightens his grip on the hose for a moment, then loosens it again, reminding himself to keep the spray gentle. Too much water at once doesn't help. It floods. It harms. The seedlings don't respond well to force. He thinks about how true that is for people too, even though it's something he forgets often. You can't pressure yourself into blooming. You can't punish yourself into becoming whole. The plants are teaching him that slowly, without words. He finishes one row and steps back, letting the water settle into the soil. The droplets on the leaves hold their shape for a second before sliding down, disappearing into the base where they're needed. He looks at the smallest seedling in the tray, the one that always seems behind the others. It stands there quiet, not apologizing for being small. And for a moment, he imagines what it might be dreaming if a seedling could dream. Not a small dream, a full dream. A dream of being a tree that spreads wide, with roots deep enough to hold steady through storms, with branches that reach out without fear, with shade that comforts anyone who stands beneath it. The thought makes something in him soften, because he knows that feeling. He has carried a dream like that too, not necessarily to be famous or admired, but to be solid. To be someone who doesn't break easily. To feel like he belongs in his own life. To wake up without that constant sense of falling behind. Sometimes he wonders if that dream is too big for him. Sometimes he thinks he should shrink it to match what his life looks like right now. But then he looks at the seedling again, thin and quiet, and he remembers something simple. A seed doesn't have to look like a tree in order to be one. It just has to keep going. He turns the nozzle slightly and gives the tray one more gentle pass, making sure the corners aren't dry. The water lands like a soft promise, not hurried, not dramatic, just consistent. And as he moves down the aisle toward the next row, he feels the pressure in his chest ease a little, replaced by something steadier. Not certainty, not confidence that everything will work out. Just a calm understanding that growth is not always visible from day to day, and that being small right now is not a sign that he is failing. It might simply be the beginning. He coils the hose neatly against the wall and wipes his hands on the side of his pants, leaving faint dark marks that fade as the fabric dries. The work isn't finished, but this part of it is, and that feels enough for now. The greenhouse holds its warmth as he moves through it, the air wrapping around him in a way that feels protective rather than heavy. The seedlings stand quietly in their trays, unchanged to the eye, yet already different from how they were a few minutes ago. Growth doesn't announce itself. It doesn't ask to be witnessed. It happens whether anyone is paying attention or not. He pauses at the end of the aisle and looks back at the rows of green, all at different stages. None of them ahead or behind in any meaningful way. They are simply responding to the conditions they've been given, doing the only work they know how to do. He thinks about how often he's tried to rush his own becoming, how he's compared his middle to someone else's outcome, how he's measured his worth against timelines that were never his, how he's mistaken impatience for motivation. Those habits didn't come from nowhere. They came from fear. From the belief that if he didn't grow fast enough, he would be left behind, overlooked, forgotten. But the plants don't grow out of fear. They grow out of alignment. They grow because the soil is right, the water is steady, and the light arrives when it can. They don't question whether they deserve the sun. They don't hold back because another plant nearby seems taller. They just receive what's offered and respond honestly. He steps closer to the smallest seedling again, the one he noticed earlier. It hasn't changed, not in any visible way, but something about it feels more present now. It stands without urgency, without comparison, without apology. It doesn't dream of being anything other than what it already is on its way to becoming. That realization lands gently in him. Maybe the problem was never that his dream was too big. Maybe the problem was that he kept trying to live it too early. A seed doesn't strain to act like a tree. It doesn't harden its stem in advance. It doesn't borrow strength it hasn't grown yet. It trusts the process it's inside of. He places his hand lightly on the edge of the tray, not touching the plant, just feeling the solid frame beneath it. The structure exists to support growth, not to rush it. For the first time in a long while, he considers the idea that he might not need to add anything to himself. No new identity, no dramatic reinvention, no proof that he's doing life right. He might only need to stop stripping himself of patience. Stop crowding his days with comparison. Stop calling slowness a flaw. Stop confusing visibility with value. The greenhouse door opens slightly as a breeze shifts outside, and fresh air slips in cool against the warmth. The balance feels good. Not too much, not too little. He breathes it in and feels something settle. He doesn't suddenly believe that everything will work out. He doesn't imagine a future where doubt never returns. But he does feel a quiet permission to stay where he is without judging it, to grow at the speed that feels true. As he turns to leave, the seedlings remain behind, unchanged in appearance, yet undeniably alive, continuing their work without needing his attention. He knows that when he returns tomorrow, they will have moved forward in ways too small to measure, yet real all the same. And maybe he will too. Because the dream he's been carrying was never about becoming impressive overnight. It was about becoming rooted. Strong enough to stand, flexible enough to bend, patient enough to let time do what it does best. He switches off the greenhouse light and steps into the morning carrying nothing extra with him. Just the understanding that even the smallest seed holds the memory of a forest, and that healing-like growth begins the moment you stop asking yourself to be something you are not yet ready to be. Anger doesn't always explode like fire. Sometimes it just smolders like a small hot coal hidden in the palm of your hand. No one can see it. No one knows it's there. But the person holding it can always feel the heat. And the strange thing is, the tighter you grip it, the more you believe you're staying in control. Miguel knew that feeling well. 45 years old, a line cook in a small restaurant used to long shifts and late nights. That evening, after clocking out, he didn't go straight home. He walked slowly along his usual street where the streetlights formed soft, uneven circles on the sidewalk. The air was cool enough to dry the sweat on his skin, but not cool enough to calm what was heating up inside him. His right hand absent-mindedly rubbed the center of his left palm. There was a faint scar there left over from an oil burn years ago. It didn't hurt anymore. But every time he touched it, the memory of that sharp sting came back clearly, just like the anger he was carrying now. Not new, not explosive, just something he had never really set down. It had started with a comment in the kitchen. No raised voices, no argument. Just a short remark said while he was at his busiest. Miguel had stayed quiet then, nodded, kept working. But the anger didn't disappear. It followed him out of the restaurant, clinging to every step, every breath. He replayed the comment in his mind. Then he imagined how he should have responded. Then he ran through a few more made-up scenarios. Each time his chest tightened a little more. Not because of the other person, but because he was adding fuel to a fire that was already there. Miguel stopped at a street corner. The sound of cars in the distance flowed steadily like a quiet current. He opened his hand and looked at his palm under the soft yellow light. There was no coal there, just skin and old scar and the natural warmth of his body. And yet the heat still felt real. There are times when we believe we're holding on to anger to protect ourselves. That if we let go, we'll lose our ground. That if we don't hold on, the other person will never understand how much they hurt us. But we rarely stop to ask, while we're waiting for them to understand, who is the one getting burned. Miguel let out a slow breath. Not a deep, effortful one, just a slightly longer exhale. His shoulders dropped almost imperceptibly. His feet kept moving, but at a gentler pace. He realized he'd been clenching his hand the entire walk without noticing. He remembered the burn from years ago. When hot oil splashed onto his hand, his first reaction wasn't to clench. It was to let go, to drop the knife, to set the pan down, to let his hand cool, to keep the damage from getting worse. No one had taught him that. His body already knew, and yet with anger he had done the opposite. He held it, turned it over in his mind, carried it with him as if it were an essential part of the story. But anger didn't make the story clearer. It only made the storyteller more tired. Miguel slowed again, then stopped completely beneath a streetlight. His shadow stretched long across the pavement. He opened his hand once more, this time with a little more awareness. Not to achieve anything, just to feel the difference between gripping and opening. Nothing magical happened. The anger didn't vanish. But there was a very small moment when he realized he didn't need to keep hurting himself just to prove that he had been hurt. The heat stopped increasing, and that alone was already a change. Miguel turned toward home. The street looked the same, the lights were the same, but his steps were a little lighter than before. Not because everything was resolved, but because he had stopped holding so tightly. Some nights we don't need to forgive. We don't need deep understanding. We don't need a conversation. We just need to put the hot coal down first. The rest can wait. Miguel got home after midnight. The small apartment was quiet, with only a dim kitchen light glowing softly, just enough so he didn't need to turn on anything else. He hung his jacket on the hook slowly, as if he didn't want to make a single unnecessary sound. Sometimes quiet isn't emptiness. Sometimes it's a place where the body finally stops being on guard. He washed his hands under the faucet. The water was warm, steady, flowing over the palm where the old scar still lived. Miguel let the water run longer than usual, not to clean, but to feel the difference between hot and warm, between burning and soothing. And something very simple became clear to him. Not every sensation needs to be endured. Some only need to be cooled at the right moment. He turned off the water, dried his hands, and stood there for a moment by the sink. There was no thought to chase, no story to continue, just an ordinary pause, the kind that happens when you finally set down something you've been holding for too long. Miguel walked into the living room and sat down. Streetlight outside the window cast slow, shifting patches of light across the wall. He didn't turn on the TV. He didn't check his phone. Those things could wait until tomorrow. Tonight, nothing needed to be filled. The anger was still somewhere nearby, but it wasn't in his hands anymore. It felt like something placed off to the side, still there, but no longer taking up space. When it wasn't being carried, it naturally felt lighter. Not because he had defeated it, but because he had stopped feeding it. He remembered other nights when anger followed him into sleep. The restless tossing, the broken dreams. The mornings when his body felt exhausted despite doing nothing physical. Holding on to anger was like keeping a fist clenched all night long. No one sees it, but in the morning, the fingers ache. Miguel leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes. Not trying to sleep, not forcing himself to relax. Just letting his body find the least tense position on its own. His shoulders dropped a little more, his jaw unclenched. His breath moved in slowly, then flowed out longer, as if there was no longer anything urgent. There's something few people notice about anger. It doesn't need to be pushed away. It only needs a little distance from the skin. With enough space, it stops burning. It becomes just another feeling passing through like so many others that have come and gone. Miguel opened his eyes and looked around the familiar room. Nothing had changed. Everything was still there. But the way he was inside the space had shifted. He wasn't carrying the need to fix, to react, to prove anything. He was just here right now in a body slowly settling down. He stood up and walked toward the bedroom. His steps were lighter, not because the floor was different, but because he wasn't dragging the weight of anger with him anymore. When he lay down, he didn't think about the other person. He didn't replay the comment. He didn't plan what he would do differently tomorrow. Those things could return, or they might not. But tonight, he didn't need to bring them into sleep. Some nights, forgiveness doesn't arrive as a big decision. It arrives quietly in something very small, like choosing not to hold the hot coal for one more minute. Not because the other person deserves it, but because your hand is already tired, already burned. Miguel turned onto his side, settling into a familiar position. The blanket rested lightly on his shoulder. The air in the room was just cool enough. His eyelids grew heavy, not from sudden drowsiness, but because nothing was pulling him awake anymore. If anger comes back another time, that's okay. It isn't an enemy. It's only a sign that something once hurt. But tonight, you don't need to hold that sign close. You can set it down the way you'd place a hot object out of your hand and let your skin rest. The room slowly sank into quiet. No conclusions, no promises, just a body allowed to settle into its safest rhythm. And in that stillness, sleep can arrive, naturally. There are things that ended long ago, yet we still carry them as if they just happened. Not because they still hurt, but because we never truly set them down. And so each step we take in the present becomes a little heavier from what belongs to the past. Henry knew that feeling well. 58 years old, retired, living alone in a small house in the suburbs. That evening, he sat on the front porch, the wooden chair creaking softly each time he shifted his weight. The wind moved through the trees in front of the house, bringing with it the quiet sound of leaves brushing against one another. The air was cool, just enough to make someone pull their collar closer, but not cold. In Henry's hands was an old letter. The paper had yellowed, the edges slightly worn. He didn't read it. He simply folded it, then unfolded it again, a habit that was hard to break. The letter had been there for years. It wasn't long. There was nothing new in it, and yet, every time he held it, he felt a small pull drawing him back. It had happened a long time ago. A misunderstanding. A sentence left unexplained. A decision made when both people were tired. No one raised their voice. No one did anything dramatic. But some cracks form quietly. And then one day, each person walks a different way. Henry went on with his life. He had work. He had a family. There were days so busy he didn't think about it at all. But on quiet evenings like this, when there was nothing left to finish or fix, the old story returned, not whole, just in pieces. A phrase, a look, a moment he wished he had handled differently. He folded the letter again, this time more neatly, and rested it on his lap. The wind lifted one corner of the paper. Henry placed his hand over it, holding it in place. Not because he was afraid it would blow away, but out of the familiar reflex of holding on. There was a very old story he had once heard about two monks crossing a river. One set the young woman down and kept walking. The other carried her all the way back to the monastery. Henry didn't think of the story as a lesson. He simply noticed something plain and honest. Some things are no longer here yet. We're still carrying them on our shoulders. His shoulder felt slightly sore, not from age, but from the way he was sitting. He shifted, leaning back more deeply into the chair. The wood creaked again. The wind kept moving. Everything around him continued on, untouched by whether or not he held the letter. Henry looked out at the road in front of his house. No cars passed. The street light stretched a long stripe of light across the asphalt. He realized he had carried this old story through many different scenes in his life, through moves, through new relationships, through years that should have been enough to finally set it down. Not because he was stubborn, simply because no one had ever said this. When something is over, you don't have to keep carrying it to prove it once mattered. You can leave it on the riverbank where it ended. Henry opened the envelope, then folded it again, this time without reading it, without straightening it carefully. Just folding it enough so it rested quietly in his hand. A very small feeling appeared, almost too small to notice, as he realized he didn't need to keep replaying that story in his mind right now. The wind picked up slightly. Leaves rustled. Henry placed the letter on the small table beside his chair, not throwing it away, not tucking it safely out of sight, just moving it out of his hands. A sense of lightness came quickly, like setting down an object you hadn't realized you'd been holding the entire time. He rested both hands on the arms of the chair, feeling the cool surface of the wood. His breath flowed out longer than usual. Not from effort, just because there was nothing left to hold. Some nights what exhausts us isn't what happened, but the fact that we're still carrying it from one stretch of road to the next. And maybe not everything needs to be carried back to the monastery. Some things were set down long ago, we just hadn't noticed yet. Henry sat there on the porch with the wind, the gentle darkness, and a very new kind of empty space that had just appeared in his hands. Henry stayed on the porch a little longer. Not because he was waiting for anything to happen, but because his body didn't want to stand up yet. When we finally stop carrying something heavy, the first instinct is often not to move forward, but to pause and feel the lightness of it. He leaned deeper into the chair, letting his back be fully supported, as if for the first time that evening, he was allowing himself to truly sit. The letter rested quietly on the small table. The wind didn't blow it away. Nothing asked him to pick it up again. Henry glanced at it once more, then looked away. Not because anything had been resolved, but because the pull to return to it was gone. Some things once set down simply lose their grip. He thought about the time after it had ended. In the beginning, the memory had been sharp and vivid. Later it faded, but never disappeared. It turned into a story he told himself again and again, each retelling, adding a detail and emotion. Not to understand it better, but to keep it alive. It occurred to Henry that he had carried that story far longer than it had ever truly existed. What happened lasted only a few minutes. But he had carried it through many years, many seasons, many quiet evenings like this one. Not because it needed to be carried, only because he had never put it down. The wind softened. Insects began their steady chorus somewhere in the darkness. Familiar night sounds that asked for no attention, simply existing. Henry noticed his breathing slow to match that rhythm without effort. When there's no story left to chase, the body remembers how to return to its natural pace. He stood up and brought the letter inside. Not to store it carefully and not to throw it away. He placed it in a hallway drawer among things he hadn't used in a long time. When the drawer closed, there was no sense of loss. Just the feeling of completing a simple, ordinary action. Henry turned off the living room light. The house settled into the familiar dimness of night. He walked slowly toward the bedroom, his steps lighter than when he had gone out to the porch. Not because he was trying to move quietly, but because nothing was weighing his steps down anymore. When he lay down, Henry didn't think about the letter. He didn't think about the other person either. Not because he had forgotten, but because those things didn't need to be present right now. The bed supported his body. The blanket rested over his shoulders. The temperature was just right, needing no adjustment. Small details that became clearer once his mind stopped working so hard. A thought passed through him. Maybe setting something down isn't a great moral act. It doesn't need anyone's approval. It doesn't require an apology or understanding from the other side. It's simply realizing you've walked far enough and you don't need to carry that thing anymore. Henry shifted, finding a familiar position. His breath moved in and out, steady and calm. The old story didn't have an ending, but it didn't need one. Some stories don't need to be closed with words. They just need to stop being carried forward. If one day in the future the memory returns, that's fine. It can come and go like the wind on the porch earlier. But tonight, Henry didn't need to keep it close. Tonight he could let himself be light. The house was quiet. There was nothing that needed to be settled before sleep. No lesson to extract. Just a person who had finally set down something carried for too long. And a body slowly finding its way back to rest. And in that open space, sleep arrived without being invited. It came naturally when nothing extra was brought into the night. By the time the shift ended, their body already knew it had been holding too much. It wasn't one sharp moment or a single bad interaction. It was the accumulation of small things, stacked quietly on top of one another the way water gathers behind a dam, long before anyone notices the pressure building. They walked down the hospital corridor toward the locker room, the fluorescent lights humming overhead in a steady, indifferent rhythm. The hallway was nearly empty now, just the soft squeak of shoes on polished floors and the distant beeping of a machine somewhere behind closed doors. Their shoulders felt tight. Their neck ached in that dull, familiar way that came from bracing without realizing it. All day they had moved quickly, spoken calmly, absorbed frustration that didn't belong to them, and kept going. That was part of the job. What no one talked about was what happened to all of that feeling once it had nowhere else to go. Inside the locker room, they set their bag down and leaned against the cool metal bench. For a moment, they just stood there, breathing, noticing how shallow each breath felt, like it didn't quite reach the bottom of their lungs. Something inside them wanted to burst, not in anger, not in tears, just in release. They twisted the cap off their water bottle, and the small crack echoed softly in the quiet room. The sound caught their attention, sharp and clear, like the beginning of something opening. They took a long drink, then another, letting the coolness travel down slowly instead of rushing it. Even that simple act felt intentional, like a small permission to pause. As they sat down, their mind returned to the moment that had tipped everything just a little too far. A comment made in passing, a look that dismissed rather than acknowledged, a feeling of being expected to absorb it and move on as if nothing had landed. They had done that, of course. They always did. But now, away from the noise and urgency, the weight of it pressed more clearly against their chest. They pictured it suddenly, without trying to. A dam. Strong. Necessary. Holding back an entire river so life downstream could continue uninterrupted. The structure wasn't the problem. The problem was what happened when there was no release. They had been taught to be that dam, to hold, to contain, to stay intact no matter how much built up behind the walls. What no one emphasized enough was the importance of the spillway. They reached into their bag and pulled out a small notebook, the kind they kept for grocery lists and reminders. It wasn't meant for emotions, but that almost made it better. There was no pressure to be eloquent, no expectation of insight. They flipped to a blank page and stared at it. For a few seconds, nothing came. Then slowly they wrote a single sentence. "I'm angry that I wasn't listened to." The words looked plain on the page, almost too simple to carry the weight they felt inside. But as soon as the sentence existed outside of them, something shifted. Their chest loosened a fraction, their jaw unclenched without being told. They wrote another line. "I'm tired of being calm when I don't feel calm." The pen moved steadily now, not fast, not rushed. Each sentence felt like opening a small gate, letting a controlled amount of water move through instead of pushing harder against the walls. They didn't blame. They didn't accuse. They didn't justify. They simply named what was there. By the time they closed the notebook, their breathing had deepened, The pressure hadn't vanished, but it no longer felt dangerous. It had somewhere to go. They stood up, slung their bag over their shoulder, and walked toward the exit. The night air outside was cool against their face, grounding in a way that felt immediate and real. As they headed to their car, they noticed something important. They weren't numb. They weren't flooded. They were balanced. The dam was still standing, but the water was no longer threatening to break it. The drive home was quieter than usual, not because there was nothing to think about, but because the pressure had already eased just enough to make space. The road stretched ahead under the glow of streetlights, each one passing in a steady rhythm like a metronome, guiding their breath back into something slower and more natural. They noticed how different their body felt compared to other nights. Usually, this was the moment when everything they had held in all day would start banging against the inside of their chest, demanding attention all at once. Tonight it stayed calmer, as if it trusted that it would be heard again if needed. At a red light, they rested their hands on the steering wheel and felt how relaxed their grip was. Their shoulders weren't hunched, their jaw wasn't locked. That small notebook sat on the passenger seat, closed now, unremarkable, but its presence mattered. It was proof that the feelings didn't have to stay trapped inside to be controlled. At home, they moved through the door quietly, setting their bag down and slipping off their shoes. The apartment was dim, the kind of soft darkness that invites you to slow down instead of rush. They went to the kitchen and poured another glass of water, listening to it hit the bottom of the glass with a clear, gentle sound. As they drank, they thought about how often anger gets misunderstood. People talk about it as something explosive, something dangerous that must be suppressed or avoided at all costs. But what they had felt all day wasn't an explosion. It was pressure. And pressure doesn't disappear by being ignored. They sat at the small table and let their thoughts drift without pushing them in any direction. The moments from earlier surfaced again, but this time without the sharp edges. They could see the situation more clearly now, not because it had changed, but because they weren't drowning in it. That was when forgiveness began to make sense in a new way. Not as an act of generosity towards someone else, not as a sudden release of understanding, but as a commitment to maintenance. Just like a dam needs regular controlled release to stay strong, they needed a way to let feelings move through without destroying anything in the process. They didn't need to confront anyone tonight. They didn't need to explain themselves perfectly. They didn't even need an apology. They just needed to keep the spillway open. Later, as they prepared for bed, they noticed how easily their bodies settled. There was no restless pacing, no urge to replay conversations or rehearse what they might say next time. The water had already been released. As they lay down, the thought came quietly, without weight. Forgiveness isn't about letting everything go at once. It's about letting a little go often enough that nothing breaks. Their breathing slowed. The day loosened its grip. What had felt heavy and overwhelming hours earlier now felt manageable, contained, and far less personal. The dam held. The river flowed. Nothing collapsed. And in that balance, sleep arrived naturally, without force without resistance, carrying them into rest, the way water moves when it's finally allowed to follow its path. His hands were already tired before he realized how tightly he'd been clenching them. All day they had wrapped around tools, gripped handles, tightened bolts, and twisted parts into place with practiced strength. The work itself wasn't unusual. He had done it for years. What felt different was the tension that stayed even when there was nothing left to hold. The garage was quiet now, the kind of quiet that comes after machines are shut down and the air slowly loses its heat. A single overhead light buzzed faintly, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. He stood at the workbench, staring at his hands. The fingers were still curled inward, as if they were expecting resistance. The muscles along his forearms felt dense, overworked, like ropes pulled too tight for too long. Earlier that day, something had happened. Nothing dramatic, no shouting, no slammed doors, just a comment made in a certain tone, a suggestion that landed more like an accusation, followed by the familiar expectation that he would absorb it and keep moving. He had done exactly that. Now alone in the garage, the moment replayed in his head, not as words, but as a sensation, a tightening, a pressure that lived in his palms and wrists, creeping up his arms. He reached for the wrench on the table and lifted it, then set it back down again. The metal made a small clink as it touched the surface, sharp and clean. That sound pulled him into the present. He flexed his fingers once slowly and noticed how stiff they felt. When he tried to fully open his hand, there was resistance, like his body had forgotten how. He walked over to the sink in the corner of the garage and turned on the tap. Water rushed out, cool and steady, splashing against the metal basin. He held his hands under the stream. At first, nothing changed. His fingers stayed half-curled, letting the water run over them without fully meeting it. Then gradually, he let them open. The sensation was immediate. Water slipped through the spaces between his fingers, impossible to hold, no matter how hard he tried. The harder he squeezed, the faster it escaped. He loosened his grip. The water flowed smoothly now, touching his palms, his knuckles, his wrists, without resistance. His hands felt lighter, less rigid, like they were remembering a shape they had known before effort took over. Something in his chest shifted. He realized then that the anger he'd been carrying all day felt exactly like that clenched fist. It was a response he didn't question anymore, something his body did automatically when it sensed threat or disrespect. A tight hand felt strong. A tight hand felt ready, but it couldn't receive anything. He shut off the water and dried his hands on a rag hanging nearby. The cloth brushed over his skin, rough but familiar, grounding him in the simple reality of touch. He thought about how many times he'd gone through entire days like this, fists clenched around things that had already passed. Conversations that were over, moments that no longer existed. Holding on to them hadn't changed the outcome, it had only exhausted him. He sat down on the low stool near the workbench and rested his forearms on his knees. His hands lay open now, palms facing upward, empty. The position felt strange at first, exposed, unprepared. Then it felt honest. He didn't suddenly understand the other person's behavior. He didn't excuse it. The irritation was still there, faint but present. What had changed was his relationship to it. He wasn't gripping it anymore. The overhead light flickered once, then steadied. The garage felt cooler now, calmer, as if it too had relaxed when he did. He stayed there for a few minutes, breathing, letting the open space in his hands teach his body what his mind already knew. There was strength in holding on, but there was also strength in opening up. And tonight, he was beginning to see the difference. He turned off the light in the garage and stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind him with a soft, familiar sound. The evening air was cooler now, brushing against his face and arms, easing the leftover warmth from the day. As he walked toward his car, he noticed his hands again. They were no longer curled into tight shapes. His fingers hung naturally at his sides, moving with each step instead of bracing for something that wasn't there. It surprised him how much that small change affected the rest of his body. His shoulders dropped. His breathing slowed. Even his thoughts felt less crowded. Driving home, the road stretched out under the headlights in a calm, predictable way. The incident from earlier tried to surface again, the tone of the comment, the familiar feeling of being pushed just a little too hard. This time, his hands stayed relaxed on the steering wheel. He didn't argue with the memory. He didn't replay it to find a better response. He simply noticed how it felt and let it pass without closing his grip around it. At a stoplight, he looked down at his hands resting on the wheel. Open, steady, ready, but not tense. That was when the thought came clearly. A closed fist can protect, but it can't connect. All day he had been ready to defend himself even when there was nothing left to defend against. The fist stayed closed out of habit, not necessity. At home, he washed his hands again, feeling the warm water run freely across his palms. He noticed how natural it felt now to let it flow. How strange it would be to try to hold on to it. He dried his hands slowly and moved through his evening routine without rush. Dinner was simple. The house was quiet. The day began to loosen its hold on him. Forgiveness entered his thoughts again, but without pressure. It wasn't a demand to soften towards someone who had hurt him. It wasn't an instruction to forget. It was the understanding that keeping his hands clenched only guaranteed that he would stay tense, even in moments that deserved ease. To forgive in this sense was to open his hands and stop carrying what no longer needed to be carried. Later, as he sat on the edge of the bed, he rested his hands on his thighs, palms open. The position no longer felt exposed. It felt grounded. He realized that when his hands were open, his body trusted the world a little more. Not because the world had changed, but because he wasn't constantly preparing for impact. The day had included frustration. That was true, but it didn't have to define the night. As he lay down, his breathing deepened naturally. His muscles softened one by one, starting with his hands, then his arms, then the rest of his body. The fist was gone. In its place was something quieter and far more useful. Space. And in that space, rest came easily, not as an escape, but as a natural result of finally letting go. She noticed it first in her shoulders. Not as pain, not exactly, but as a constant low-level tension that never fully went away, no matter how many times she rolled them back or stretched her neck between clients. The day had been full. The chairs rarely empty, the mirrors always reflecting movement. Snip, snip. The sound of scissors moved steadily through the room, rhythmic and familiar. Most days the work grounded her. The repetition, the focus, the quiet trust between hands and hair. But today there had been someone who rubbed against her patience in a way she couldn't quite ignore. Not loudly, not openly. Just a few comments, a certain tone. The kind of energy that scraped instead of touched. She didn't respond to it at the time. She smiled. She kept working. She did what she always did, letting professionalism smooth over the edges. Now, after closing time, she swept the floor slowly, the soft shh of the broom filling the quiet space. Small piles of hair gathered near her feet, reminders of the day's work, light and harmless. The comments replayed anyway. Not word for word, but as a feeling, a friction, like something had been dragging across her all afternoon, leaving her irritated without a clear place to point to. She leaned the broom against the wall and sat down in one of the chairs, the vinyl cool against the back of her legs. In the mirror, she saw her own reflection, tired but composed, the same face she showed everyone else. Her hands rested in her lap, palms down, fingers relaxed. That's when the image came to her. Sandpaper. She thought about how it works, how rough it feels at first contact, how it scrapes and stings if you press too hard against it, how the instinct is always to pull away or push back. But she also knew what sandpaper was actually for. It doesn't hurt for no reason. It wears things down. It smooths surfaces over time. She stood up and walked over to the small supply shelf in the corner, where bottles and tools sat neatly arranged. She picked up a piece of actual sandpaper left over from a small repair job weeks ago. She ran her thumb lightly across it. Rough, uncomfortable, effective. The thought landed quietly. Some people don't show up in your life to be soft. They show up to rub against you, to test the edges you didn't know were sharp, to expose where you still react instead of choose. That didn't mean their behavior was kind. It didn't mean it was justified. It just meant she didn't have to become rough in response. She set the sandpaper back down and returned to the mirror. The comments tried to rise again, but this time they felt different, less personal, less sticky. She noticed something else then. Each time she replayed the interaction, she tightened. Each time she imagined what she should have said, her jaw clenched. It wasn't the person hurting her anymore. It was the friction she kept creating by pressing against it. She took a slow breath and let her shoulders drop. What if she didn't push back? What if she didn't pull away? What if she let the contact happen without resistance? The idea felt strange, almost counterintuitive. She had always believed that strength meant standing firm, protecting yourself by being just as hard as whatever came at you. But sitting there alone in the quiet shop, she saw another option. If she stayed still, stayed soft, the roughness wouldn't have anything to work against. Sandpaper only smooths what presses into it. She picked up the broom again and finished sweeping her movements unhurried now. The irritation hadn't vanished, but it no longer felt sharp. It was dulling, losing its edge with each steady breath. As she turned off the lights and locked the door, the day settled behind her. The interaction still existed. The person would likely still be the same tomorrow, but she didn't feel scraped raw. She felt polished. Not because she had endured in silence, not because she had swallowed anything, but because she had stopped fighting the friction and let it pass without turning herself into something coarse. The walk to her car felt quieter than usual. The street outside the shop had already settled into evening lights, glowing softly behind windows, the sound of traffic moving at a distance instead of pressing in close. She noticed how her body moved now, less guarded, less braced for contact. Earlier, that same walk might have carried the weight of the day with it. The comments would have followed her, replaying themselves as she drove home, sharpening with each repetition. Tonight they stayed behind, not because she pushed them away, but because there was nothing left for them to catch on to. As she drove, her hands rested lightly on the steering wheel. She could feel the texture beneath her palms without gripping it, aware, but not tense. The road flowed smoothly, lane lines slipping past in an easy rhythm. Her thoughts returned briefly to the person from earlier. She saw them more clearly now, without the charge that had made everything feel personal. Someone restless. Someone rough around the edges. Someone moving through the world with more friction than necessary. It didn't excuse the behavior, but it explained why it felt the way it did. Sandpaper, she thought again. Rough because it's meant to wear something down. Rough because it hasn't learned another way to make contact. The difference now was that she didn't feel like the surface being ground away. She had learned when to soften. At home, she moved through her evening slowly, changing into comfortable clothes, rinsing her hands at the sink, watching the water bead and slide off her skin. Even that small sensation felt different, smoother somehow. She realized then that forgiveness, at least in this form, wasn't about welcoming someone's roughness back into her space. It wasn't about inviting more friction or pretending it didn't hurt. It was about refusing to let someone else's texture determine her own. When she stayed soft, the sandpaper had nothing to work on. Later, sitting on the edge of the bed, she rested her hands on her thighs and noticed how calm they felt. No twitching, no urge to brace. The day had included discomfort. That was true. But it hadn't worn her down. Instead, it had shown her something useful. She didn't need to harden herself to survive rough people. She didn't need to become sharp in return. She could stay smooth and in doing so protect her peace without a single argument. As she lay down, her breathing deepened naturally. The room was quiet. The tension that had once lived in her shoulders had dissolved into something softer, something almost imperceptible. The sandpaper would exist again in other forms on other days. But she no longer feared it. She knew now that when she stopped pressing against it, it was the roughness that wore away, not her. And with that understanding, rest came easily, steady and unforced, like sleep had simply been waiting for her to stop resisting. The first thing they noticed was the sky. They had stepped out onto the shared rooftop of the apartment building without much intention, just needing air after a long evening of sitting with thoughts that wouldn't quite settle. The city stretched out below, quiet in that late-hour way, where sounds soften instead of disappear. Above it all, a dark cloud drifted slowly across the night sky. It wasn't dramatic. No thunder, no lightning, just a heavy shape moving at its own pace, dimming the stars as it passed. They leaned against the railing and watched it, feeling something familiar stir in their chest. The day had left its mark. A conversation that ended without resolution. A feeling of being misunderstood. The subtle ache of carrying irritation without knowing where to set it down. They hadn't been angry in an obvious way. No raised voice, no sharp reactions, just a low, steady tension that followed them from room to room, like the cloud above, quiet but unmistakable. They took a slow breath and let their eyes trace the edges of the cloud. It reminded them of how anger often arrived, not as an explosion, not as fire, but as something that slowly spreads, shading everything beneath it until even small moments feel heavier than they should. They had spent most of the evening trying to push the feeling away, distracting themselves, scrolling, tidying things that didn't need to be tidied. None of it worked for long. The cloud stayed. They rested their forearms on the railing and felt the cool metal through their sleeves. The contact grounded them, pulled their attention back into their body where the tension lived. It was there, centered just below the chest, steady and dense. They closed their eyes for a moment and noticed how their breath skimmed the surface of that tightness without fully touching it. Each inhale stopped short, as if their body was hesitant to go deeper. They opened their eyes again and looked back up at the sky. The cloud hadn't stopped the sky from existing. It hadn't damaged it. It was simply passing through. That realization came softly, without force. The sky didn't chase clouds away. It didn't hold on to them either. It allowed them. They placed one hand over their chest and named the feeling silently. Anger. Not blame. Not justification. Just a simple acknowledgement. The word didn't intensify the feeling the way they expected. If anything, it gave it shape, made it easier to see, instead of something that blurred everything else. They stayed there breathing, letting the feeling exist without adding a story to it. No replaying the conversation, no imagining better responses, just noticing how the sensation rose and fell slightly with each breath. The cloud above continued its slow movement, its edges shifting, thinning in places, growing lighter as it drifted farther across the sky. They realized something then. The anger wasn't asking to be solved. It wasn't demanding action. It just wanted space to move. They had been treating it like a problem to fix something that needed to be explained away or suppressed. But standing there watching the sky do nothing at all, they saw another option. What if they didn't try to get rid of it? What if they didn't cling to it either? What if they let it pass? A cool breeze moved across the rooftop, brushing against their face. They inhaled more deeply this time, feeling the breath reach the tight place in their chest, gently expanding it instead of pushing against it. The sensation softened slightly. Not gone, just less solid. They stayed until the cloud moved farther on, revealing a few faint stars behind it. The sky hadn't changed. The night hadn't been improved or worsened. It had simply continued being what it was. As they turned to head back downstairs, the anger was still there, but it no longer filled the entire space inside them. It was a part of the sky now, not the whole thing. And that felt like enough for tonight. They didn't stay on the rooftop much longer. Not because the feeling had vanished, but because there was nothing more they needed to do with it there. The cloud had shown them what it came to show, and the rest could unfold in its own time. Inside the stairwell, the sounds of the building were muted and familiar. Footsteps echoed softly. A door closed somewhere below. Life continued ordinary and unremarkable, even as emotions moved quietly through them. Back in their apartment, they turned on a small lamp instead of the overhead light. The room filled with a warm, gentle glow that didn't ask much of their attention. They set their keys down, slipped off their shoes, and let their bodies slow naturally. The anger returned briefly as they sat on the couch. It rose without warning, like a cloud drifting back into view after you think it has passed. A memory surfaced. A phrase from the conversation replayed itself, sharper this time, more defined. They noticed it immediately. Not as a threat, just as weather. They placed one hand over their chest again and felt the familiar density smaller, now less overwhelming than before. Their breath moved in and out steadily, no longer avoiding the tight place, no longer trying to force it open. They remembered the sky, how it hadn't reacted, how it hadn't clung. The anger wasn't something they had to forgive right away. It didn't need analysis or judgment. It simply needed to move. They let the memory be there without following it, without finishing the thought, without defending themselves. In their head, the sensation shifted, subtle but real. It thinned. Forgiveness entered quietly, not as an idea, but as a feeling of release. Not toward the other person, not yet, but toward themselves. They didn't need to stay tense to prove anything. They didn't need to keep the cloud close to stay alert. Letting it pass didn't mean they approved of what happened, and it meant they trusted themselves to handle things later when clarity returned. They stood up and went to the window, looking out at the city lights scattered below. Somewhere out there, clouds still moved across the sky, unseen, but unchanged in their nature. They understood then that the sky never tries to be cloudless. It simply remains wide enough to hold whatever comes and goes. That was the kind of forgiveness they were learning. Not a single moment. Not a final decision. Just the willingness to stop gripping what was already drifting away. As they prepared for bed, their movements felt smoother, less interrupted by inner commentary. The day had left marks, but they were no longer heavy. Lying down, they felt the mattress support their weight fully. Their breathing deepened on its own, the body recognizing that it was safe to rest. The anger hadn't been erased. It had been allowed, and in that allowance, it lost its power to darken everything else. The cloud passed. The sky remained, and sleep arrived quietly, like night always does without needing permission. She notices the draft before she notices the noise. It slips in through the small gap beneath the back door, barely strong enough to move the curtain, but enough to brush against her ankles as she stands in the kitchen. The room is dim, lit only by the soft yellow bulb above the sink and the faint glow of the streetlight outside the window. She sets her bag down on the counter and exhales long and slow, the way people do when they're trying to leave the day behind without fully knowing how. Her shoulders feel tight, like they've been holding something upright for hours. Outside, a car passes. Somewhere down the block, someone laughs too loudly, the sound sharp in the quiet. Her phone buzzes once, then again, resting face up on the counter as if it has something important to say. She doesn't look at it yet. Instead, she opens a drawer and takes out a small candle. It's nothing special, just one she picked up months ago and never used. She sets it near the sink, pushes aside a dish towel, and strikes a match. The flame catches with a quick, dry sound, then steadies thin and upright. For a moment, it holds perfectly still. Then the draft reaches it. The flame bends slightly, leaning to one side, its shape changing with every faint movement of air. It doesn't go out, but it doesn't stand straight either. It wavers, adjusting again and again. She watches it longer than she expects to. Her phone buzzes once more. This time she glances at the screen. A message preview, a headline. Someone's opinion delivered quickly and without invitation. Her chest tightens in response, the familiar pull to read, to respond, to explain. She turns the phone face down. The flame flickers again, reacting instantly to the shift in air as she moves. It doesn't resist. It doesn't complain. It simply responds moment by moment, doing what flames do to stay alive. She leans against the counter, arms crossed loosely, eyes fixed on the candle. The day has been full of voices, meetings, conversations layered with expectations, advice given freely, sometimes kindly, sometimes not. Even now, alone in her kitchen, the noise hasn't stopped. It hums quietly inside her, replaying comments, imagining responses, anticipating what someone might think next. She tells herself she should be used to this by now. Careers, relationships, daily life, all of it comes with opinions. You learn to handle it. You learn to listen selectively. At least that's what she's always believed. But watching the candle, she notices something she hasn't thought about before. The flame isn't trying to block the wind. It isn't fighting it. And yet it isn't letting the wind define it either. When the draft grows stronger, the flame bends lower, shrinking its shape, conserving itself. When the air stills, it rises again, bright and steady. She feels something soften in her chest. Her phone buzzes again, more insistently this time. A new message. Another voice asking for attention. She picks it up, reads just enough to know it will pull her into a familiar spiral if she lets it. She doesn't respond. Instead, she reaches for the door and presses it closed more firmly, feeling the latch catch with a soft click. The draft weakens immediately. The flame straightens its light, growing calmer, more contained. She hadn't realized how much air had been moving through the room. She sits down at the small kitchen table, the candle between her and the sink, and rests her hands in her lap. The silence isn't complete. The refrigerator hums. The building settles. The city breathes beyond the walls. But something important has shifted. For a long time, she's believed that peace comes from managing everything outside her, from responding quickly, from correcting misunderstandings before they grow, from staying alert to every change in tone. Now sitting here, she sees how exhausting that has been. The flame doesn't ask the wind to stop. It simply adjusts its own shape and relies on the space immediately around it. When the space is calmer, the flame thrives without effort. She thinks about how often she's left her own doors open, letting every opinion rush in, believing it's her responsibility to stay exposed. The candle burns quietly, its wax beginning to pool at the base. Nothing dramatic happens. No realization crashes through her. Just a gentle awareness settling into place. She doesn't need to put herself out to survive the noise. She watches the flame a little longer, letting its steady presence anchor her attention, and for the first time all evening, her mind stops racing ahead to the next thing that might disturb her. She doesn't blow the candle out. That thought crosses her mind for a moment, the way it often does when something feels slightly overwhelming. Ending it would be simple. One breath and the light would disappear. Instead, she reaches for a small glass bowl from the counter and turns it upside down, placing it near the flame without covering it. The glass catches the light, reflecting it back softly, changing the way the shadows move along the wall. The candle burns on calmer now, less reactive to the faint movements of air in the room. She leans back in her chair and lets her hands rest on the table. The position feels unfamiliar, like she's no longer bracing herself for something. Her shoulders lower, and the space between her thoughts begins to widen, not because she's trying to quiet her mind, but because there's less to react to. Her phone vibrates again. She doesn't flinch this time. She reaches for it slowly, as if testing how much attention it actually deserves. The screen lights up. Another message, another opinion, another small demand for response. She reads it once, then sets the phone down a little farther away, out of easy reach. Nothing in the room changes. The candle doesn't flicker in protest. The walls don't close in. The night continues indifferent to her decision. She realizes how often she's treated every notification like a gust of wind she has to face head on. Every message, every comment, every reaction has felt like something she must answer immediately, as if her calm depended on staying engaged. But watching the candle now, she sees that calm isn't something you defend by standing exposed. It's something you protect by choosing how much air you let in. She gets up and turns off the kitchen light, leaving only the candle's glow. The room softens instantly, edges blurring just enough to feel gentle. The shadows deepen, but they don't feel threatening. They feel like rest. She sits back down and lets her eyes follow the small movements of the flame. Even sheltered, it still shifts slightly, responding to the subtle currents of the room. It isn't frozen. It isn't rigid. It's alive, adjusting without panic. That feels important. For a long time, she's believed that being strong meant staying open to everything, taking it all in, enduring the noise, proving she could handle it. But that strength has often come at the cost of her own steadiness. Now she sees another kind of strength taking shape. It's quieter, less impressive. It doesn't argue or explain. It simply chooses where to stand. She thinks about the conversations she's replayed in her head, the ones she wishes had gone differently. The comments that linger longer than they should. The imagined judgments that follow her home even when no one is actually speaking. They still exist. She knows that. The world hasn't softened just because she has, but they feel farther away now, like sounds from another room with the door gently closed. She exhales slow and full, and feels the tension drain from her neck. The candle's light reflects in the glass bowl, doubling and then softening, as if the flame has found a way to rest without disappearing. She doesn't promise herself she'll always protect her peace this way. She doesn't turn it into a rule or a resolution. She knows there will be days when the doors are left open again, when the wind rushes in and the flame wavers. Tonight doesn't need to solve every other night. It only needs to be this one. She sits there until the wax has melted further, until the flame has settled into a steady, patient burn. The phone remains silent on the counter, not because the world has stopped talking, but because she has stopped inviting it so close. When she finally stands to blow the candle out, she does it gently with intention. The smoke rises in a thin, quiet line, then fades into the air. The room darkens, but it doesn't feel empty. It feels protected. They notice the shadow before they notice themselves. It stretches long across the sidewalk, darker than expected, shaped by the streetlight behind them. For a moment, it looks almost like someone else walking ahead, moving when they move, stopping when they stop. They slow their pace. The night is quiet in that way neighborhoods get after most windows have gone dark. A porch light hums softly. Somewhere a dog shifts in its sleep. Their own footsteps sound louder than usual, each one landing with a clear, deliberate rhythm. They glance down again. The shadow has changed shape longer now, thinner, reaching farther than it should. It makes their chest tighten in a small, familiar way. They don't like this time of night. Not because it's dangerous, but because it leaves too much room for thought. During the day, there are distractions, conversations, things that demand attention. At night, the mind wanders freely, and it doesn't always choose gentle places to go. They tell themselves to walk faster, but instead they slow, even more curious, despite the discomfort. The shadow isn't threatening. It isn't doing anything. It's just there, following faithfully, no matter how they try to ignore it. They think about how often they've felt this way, about parts of themselves. Traits they'd rather not acknowledge. Reactions that surprise them. Thoughts that appear suddenly uninvited and linger longer than they'd like. During the day, they manage these parts carefully. They stay polite, controlled, reasonable. But at night, those edges feel sharper, harder to look away from. A breeze moves through the trees lining the street, and the leaves respond with a soft rustle. The shadow shivers with the movement of branches above, breaking into uneven shapes along the pavement. They stop under the light. The shadow pools around their feet now, shorter, darker, less dramatic. It doesn't stretch ahead anymore. It waits. They stand there, hands in their pockets, feeling the cool air on their face. The light behind them casts a clear outline, honest and unflattering. There's no place for the shadow to hide. They wonder when they started believing that shadows mean something is wrong. Shadows appear because there is light. Without light, there would be nothing to cast them. This is something they know in theory, something simple enough to explain, yet difficult to remember. When the mind starts to judge itself harshly, they shift their weight from one foot to the other. The shadow follows obedient and immediate. They remember times they've replayed their own mistakes late at night, watching them grow larger in their thoughts, stretching farther than they ever did in reality. One comment, one reaction, one imperfect moment becomes a shape that seems to define them entirely. Standing here, they notice how the shadow distorts when they move, how it lengthens and shrinks depending on their position, not because it has changed, but because the light has. The realization settles slowly. Maybe the parts of themselves they fear aren't growing. Maybe the angle has just changed. They take a step forward out of the brightest part of the light. The shadow stretches again, reaching ahead, exaggerated and unfamiliar. The feeling returns, a slight unease, a tightening in the stomach. They pause, then step back. The shadow shortens. Nothing about them has changed, only their position. They let out a quiet breath, the kind that releases a thought before it has time to turn into a story. The street remains empty. The night remains still. For a long time, they've tried to outrun this feeling, to walk faster than their doubts, to stay busy enough that the shadow never has time to catch up. But it always does. Now, standing here under the streetlight, they try something different. They turn around slowly. The shadow slips behind them, no longer in front, no longer something to watch. They can't see it now, but they know it's still there, doing exactly what it has always done. Following. They stand like that for a moment, facing the light, feeling its warmth faintly on their back. The darkness behind them doesn't feel as heavy when they aren't staring directly into it. They begin to walk again, this time without checking the pavement every few steps. The shadow stays with them, unseen, but present. And for the first time tonight, that doesn't feel like a threat. They walk for a while without thinking about the shadow at all. Their attention drifts to the sound of their breathing, the steady pattern of steps, the quiet consistency of the street. The houses pass by one after another, each one dark or softly lit, holding lives that have already settled into sleep. When a thought tries to pull them back inward, they notice it and keep walking. The streetlight behind them fades, replaced by another farther ahead. With each shift of light, the shadow changes again, stretching, shrinking, breaking apart, coming back together. It's never the same shape twice, and yet it's always connected to them. They think about how often they've tried to define themselves by their worst moments. How easily the mind collects imperfections and lines them up as evidence, as if they tell the whole story. Tonight, those thoughts arrive more gently. They pass a parked car, its surface catching the glow of the light for a brief second before releasing it. The reflection moves across the metal and disappears, leaving nothing behind. It reminds them of how fleeting attention can be when it isn't held in place by fear. They slow near an intersection, waiting for the crosswalk light to change. The road is empty, but habit keeps them still. The red hand glows steadily, patient and unbothered. While they wait, a familiar thought surfaces, a memory they usually avoid. It's imperfect, uncomfortable, tied to a version of themselves they wish had known better. This time they don't turn away. They let the memory be there without explanation or defense. They notice how it feels in the body, where it tightens, where it loosens. They don't add commentary. They don't label it as good or bad. The crosswalk light changes. They step forward, and the memory doesn't follow. It stays behind, fading naturally, like the shadow when the light shifts again. They realize something then, quietly and without ceremony. The shadow has never been chasing them. It has never been trying to overtake them or pull them down. It has only been responding to the light they stand in and the direction they choose to face. When they turn toward the light, the shadow moves out of sight. When they turn away, it stretches ahead and demands attention. Neither position is wrong, but one feels easier to live with. They reach the end of the block and turn the corner, leaving the street lights behind for a stretch of darker road. The shadow becomes faint, barely visible, blending into the night. They don't feel relieved. They feel steady. For years they've tried to get rid of the parts of themselves they don't like, to fix them, to think them away, to pretend they don't exist. All that effort has only made those parts louder in the quiet moments. Now, walking through the softer darkness, they sense a different approach taking shape. They don't need to love every part of themselves tonight. They don't need to understand it all. They don't need to resolve every inner conflict. They only need to stop running. A breeze passes through, carrying the faint smell of damp earth and leaves. It settles on their skin and then moves on, leaving nothing behind. The night feels wider now, less crowded by judgment. As they near their building, the entrance light comes on, automatically illuminating the path ahead. Their shadow appears once more, brief and unremarkable, then disappears as they step inside. The door closes softly behind them. In the quiet stairwell, they pause, hand resting on the railing. The light overhead hums faintly, steady and contained. There is no shadow here, only clean walls and even illumination. They notice how little they miss it. Not because it was something to fear, but because it no longer needs their attention. They climb the stairs slowly, unhurried, feeling the solid presence of each step beneath their feet. Their thoughts move at the same pace, no longer racing ahead or circling back. By the time they reach their door, the night feels settled inside them. They turn the key, step into the dim room, and close the door gently behind them. The light is enough. He doesn't realize how tense he is until he turns the faucet off. The kitchen goes quiet all at once, and the sudden silence makes him pause, one hand still resting on the edge of the sink. The overhead light hums faintly. A single drop of water clings to the metal, then falls sharp and clear in the stillness. He stands there longer than necessary, staring at the bottom of the sink where the water has already disappeared. The day has left a residue behind. Not one specific problem, not one dramatic moment, but a buildup of small things. Delays. Comments that landed the wrong way. Tasks that took more effort than they should have. None of it feels serious enough to complain about, yet together they sit heavy in his chest. He reaches for a glass from the drying rack and holds it under the faucet again, filling it halfway. The sound of running water is soothing in a way he doesn't question. It's steady, predictable. It doesn't ask him to explain anything. He sets the glass on the counter and leans against it, arms crossed loosely, eyes unfocused. His thoughts begin to line themselves up one after another, as they often do when the house is quiet. They review the day carefully, pausing at moments that still feel sharp. Each thought seems small on its own, but together they create a familiar tightness, like something dissolving slowly inside him. He opens a small container and sprinkles salt into the glass without really thinking about it. The grains disappear almost instantly, leaving the water clear and unchanged to the eye. He lifts the glass, takes a sip, and immediately winces. Too much. The taste spreads across his tongue, sharp and overwhelming, catching him off guard. He swallows anyway, feeling the discomfort settle, then sets the glass down with a quiet clink. He exhales through his nose, half amused, half irritated with himself. That's how it feels lately, he thinks. Like everything has the same flavor. Too intense, too much at once. Even the smallest issue seems to leave a bitter aftertaste that lingers longer than it should. He pours the glass out and rinses it, watching the salty water swirl away down the drain. He refills it this time, adding only a small pinch. He stirs slowly with a spoon, the metal tapping softly against the glass. He tastes it again. Better. Still noticeable, but manageable. He sets the glass down and rests his palms on the counter, staring at the surface, where the overhead light reflects back at him. The reflection is imperfect, slightly warped, but steady. He's always believed that stress comes from what happens to you. From the amount of pressure, the weight of circumstances, the number of problems piling up at once. It feels logical. If things are hard, of course it hurts. But standing here now, he notices something else. The salt didn't change. The glass did. He reaches for a larger pitcher from the cabinet and fills it with water. The sound is deeper this time, fuller. He pours the same amount of salt into it, stirs, and takes a sip. The taste is barely there. It's not gone completely, but it no longer dominates. It no longer demands all his attention. He leans back against the counter, holding the pitcher loosely, feeling its weight in his hands. His breathing slows without instruction, like his body has recognized something before his mind can catch up. The problems of the day haven't disappeared. He knows that. Tomorrow will bring its own version of the same challenges. But the way they sit inside him feels different now. Less concentrated, less urgent. He realizes how often he's been living in a small glass. His days packed tight, his attention narrowed, his mind circling the same thoughts again and again, leaving no room for anything else. In that space, even a little stress has nowhere to go, but straight into him. He pours himself another glass from the pitcher and drinks slowly, this time noticing how the water moves, how it cools his throat, how it settles. The bitterness is faint now, almost unimportant. He stands there, letting the moment stretch, not trying to turn it into a lesson or a promise. Just noticing how different it feels to have more room. The kitchen hasn't changed. The light hums the same way. The night outside remains quiet and ordinary. But something inside him has widened. He doesn't rush to clean up. The pitcher stays on the counter, the glass beside it, both catching the soft kitchen light. He leans his hips against the edge and lets his thoughts move without pushing them in any direction. For once, they don't crowd him. A familiar worry drifts into awareness, something unfinished from earlier in the day. Normally, it would tighten his chest immediately, pulling his focus inward until nothing else exists. Now it arrives and settles gently like a grain of salt falling into deep water. It's still there. It just doesn't burn. He notices how his breathing has changed. Slower, fuller, not forced. His shoulders feel less lifted, his jaw unclenched. The shift is subtle but unmistakable, like the difference between holding a cup too tightly and realizing you can loosen your grip without dropping it. He thinks about how often he's tried to solve stress by removing it. Fix the problem. Finish the task. Say the right thing. Move on quickly. Sometimes that works. Often it doesn't. Standing here now, he understands something his body has known longer than his mind. Some things don't need to be removed. They need more space around them. He pours the remaining water from the glass back into the pitcher, then tops it off with more from the faucet. The sound fills the room again, steady and generous. He stirs once slow and deliberate, watching the movement spread evenly. He takes another sip. There's no sharpness now. Just cool water, clean and ordinary. The moment reminds him of other times in his life when stress felt manageable even when things weren't easy. Long walks where his thoughts gradually loosened. Conversations that widened his perspective. Even simple routines that gave his mind something larger to rest in. It was never because the problems disappeared. It was because his inner space grew. He carries the pitcher to the table and sits down, letting the chair scrape softly against the floor. The kitchen feels quieter from here, less like a place to do things and more like a place to be. He doesn't tell himself to think positive thoughts. He doesn't try to replace worries with gratitude or lessons. He simply lets them pass through the wider field of his attention, noticing how they no longer get stuck. A thought arises. Another follows. Then a pause. In that pause, there is relief, not the dramatic kind, but the kind that comes from not being squeezed. He realizes how much of his overthinking has been fueled by constriction. Tight schedules, tight expectations, tight narratives about who he should be and how he should handle things. When the mind is held too tightly, even kindness can feel sharp. He finishes the glass and sets it down empty, now clean and light. The pitcher is still half full. He knows he can come back to it later, refill it again if he wants. That feels comforting in an unexpected way. The night continues outside the window, quiet and unremarkable. No breakthrough arrives. No final understanding clicks into place. and yet he feels different, not fixed, just less crowded. He stands, rinses the glass, and places it upside down in the drying rack. The simple motion feels complete in itself, not a step toward anything else. Before turning off the light, he pauses once more, taking in the room. The counter, the sink, the faint reflection in the dark window. Everything looks the same as it did earlier. Only now there's more room inside him to hold it. He switches off the light and leaves the kitchen, the quiet following him down the hall. His thoughts slow to match his steps, spreading out, no longer competing for attention. Tonight the salt is still there, but the water is wide enough. Wherever you are tonight, I'm grateful you chose to spend this quiet time here. If these stories help you rest, you're welcome to subscribe and return whenever you need a gentle place to land. And now, you don't need to do anything more. Let the night hold what you can't carry. And if sleep comes, let it come.